Welcome back to the WoW Generalist. This is Deresk, and today we're doing a tanking guide for Vengeance Demon Hunter. This is Dragonflight Season 4, and we're in the training center at Valdraken. And I'm using my Demon Hunter tank Stamantia to help me walk through this presentation. We previously did a general tanking guide to help folks learn tips and tricks to be better tanks. This one is more focused specifically on Demon Hunter. So what is Demon Hunter? Demon Hunter tank is a leather-wearing tank, which means you have more HP and you take more damage. Of all the tanks in the game, Demon Hunter tank is more of a pure AoE tank. Their strengths are AoE damage, and although you can do a significant amount of pure single target, they're really designed for AoE situations, add, pulls, mobility, crowd control. Those are all strengths of a Demon Hunter tank. So if you're building your tank, you have a couple of choices on talent builds. You're either going to go more for a single target build in the Soul Cleave Frailty build, or you're going to lean into Spirit Bomb and Fiery Brand. So for this tank, and regardless of which tank class build you play for Demon Hunter, at item level 515, we'll say 515 to 520, you should be doing between 200 to 250k DPS, and you should be capable of doing 250k healing. The amount of damage you take is important. That's one of the major differences between the two major playstyles for Demon Hunter. The Soul Cleave build, you will take more damage. You can do more healing in some instances, but overall, the amount of damage taken is going to be significantly higher. The example I've got here is a Neltharis 8 on Fortified with Volcanic. Overall DPS over 200. Overall damage taken is 114k. So if you play Demon Hunter tank, you can evaluate your performance based on what I've got on the screen. Like all of the WoW Generalist guides, this guide is designed for the other 97%, the folks that are still leveling their tunes, the folks that are still learning how to play their tank. And hopefully for the other folks who have been doing it for a long time, maybe you learned something. So let's go through Vengeance Demon Hunter. You have passive mitigation. Some of the guides will tell you don't, but you do. Multiple passive mitigations. Your dodge chance, you have dodge and parry, and you have physical damage reduction. Your dodge chance is based on your agility. The higher your agility, the more dodge chance you have. The more armor you have, the more you can reduce physical damage taken. And for those folks who would say, what about magical damage? You do have magical damage mitigation, however, primarily in a Mythic Plus. About 2/3 of all damage you take is going to be physical damage. So in this dungeon, I took 145 million damage. Over 90 million of that was physical damage taken. So this tank is well suited for that environment. Another important metric, which we'll get into in a minute, is the amount of healing taken in any given dungeon. And I'll show you one of the benefits of this build as it relates to healers in just a minute. But let's go through your stats. Agility directly increases your dodge chance. At or above 515, you'll be at over 2 million HP leatherware. You should have physical damage reduction stock of better than 40% without using any talents or anything, just through gear. Critical strike directly affects your parry chance. The more critical strike, the more parry. The more armor, the more dodge. So raising your item level is first and foremost top priority above secondary stats. Haste is important for a Demon Hunter tank, that your build works better. It's predicated on haste. Several of your key talents, Immolation Aura, Fracture, Fellblade, Demon Spikes, for example, are all impacted by haste. The cooldown is reduced by haste, so the more haste, the better. Mastery, your leather-wearing tank and physical damage reduction is vital to the success of your role, and that's what Mastery does for Demon Hunter Tank. It provides an attack power increase. It reduces your overall damage taken, physical damage taken, and that stat is doubled when you have Demon Spikes active. So you want to have at least some Mastery. Your maximum physical damage reduction is 85% when you're using Immolation Aura and Demon Spikes. For example, you can, in this training center against the target dummies, you can get to 76% physical damage reduction in a dungeon when you're using Metamorphosis, Immolation Aura, and Demon Spikes. You can hit the 85% cap. So you want to have enough mastery so that you can actually get to 85% physical damage reduction. You don't need any more than that. Versatility, increased damage done, healing done, reduced damage taken. It's just a stat stick, basically, if you will. And when you're looking at how you take damage as a tank, it's right there with your armor, right? Armor and versatility are considered together in that roll, that damage roll of how much damage you're going to take. So having a good baseline, probably 15%, is important, right? Stat priority, crit and haste, above 40%. Mastery and versatility, you probably want 30% mastery, 15% versatility. That would be a solid build, 40, 40, 30, 15, right? As much agility and armor as you can get. And that's, agility is directly impacted by the trinkets you select. For example, I'm using the Augury of the Primal, which is critical strike. So I'm losing 12 or 1300 agility. And this trinket needs to make up the difference because it is a DPS trinket based on fire damage you do, so it's a good trinket for a Demon Hunter tank. It has to do more DPS than if I had taken a trinket that had agility, like the Ruby Whelp Shell, for example, that gives a static agility increase plus a pretty significant haste buff. But it's only about 15% uptime, the haste buff. So you have to weigh your choices on overall attack power versus throughput of the Augury of the Primal, for example, if you're considering those two trinkets. All right, so passive mitigation is physical damage reduction, dodge and parry. Secondary stats, directly in critical strike, right? Directly impacts your passive mitigation. Haste makes the build work. So overall, expect at 515, 200 to 250k DPS. The capability during ad pulls to pull between 5 and 600k DPS regularly, while also doing 250k healing. And just to clarify for all those folks, the build I selected, I didn't pick the Soulcleave build, I picked the Spirit Bomb Firebrand build, right? I don't use illuminated sigils in this build. I'm focused on my physical damage reduction through Demon Spikes, which is your only active mitigation as a Demon Hunter tank, right? When you go to a boss fight, they're going to do an active mitigation check, and if you don't have Demon Spike active, you're going to take a crushing blow. So you want to have Demon Spikes active as frequently as possible, and with this build, you can get upwards of 90% uptime on Demon Spikes. Your build is an AoE fire build, so I've selected most of the talents on the right side of my spec to improve fire damage and improve Firebrand uptime. I already have significant crowd control in Sigil of Silence, Sigil of Chains, Sigil of Misery, Chaos Nova. So having double that, those are all globals. It's quality of life, it's playstyle, right? I'd rather have 50% or better uptime on demon spikes. So instead of taking illuminated sigils, reducing the cooldown of Fiery Brand by 25% while giving an extra charge, and while talenting into Fiery Demise, it increases all fire damage I do by 50%, all while knowing that Fiery Brand reduces all damage taken, physical and magic damage, by 40% for its duration, and taking Burning Alive, which allows Fiery Brand to spread to one additional target every 1 second. It's important to note that the additional charge of Fiery Brand does not overlap. It extends the duration. So Fiery Brand has a duration of 12 seconds. You can extend that duration to 24 by hitting it twice, which is enough duration for most ad pulls and will give you better than 70% uptime during a boss fight. And if you talent into Feed the Demon and you selected Extended Spikes, you can get to 90% uptime overall in dungeon for Demon Spikes, which reduces physical damage taken and gives you a 15% increase in parry chance, right? If you look at Illuminated Sigils, one of the benefits to Illuminated Sigils is for all enemies standing in your Sigil of Flame, you get a 15% additional parry chance. And you get 1 extra charge of all your sigils. So uptime on Sigil of Flame is vital to the success of that build, right? But in this build, you're going to have consistent damage done, consistent damage taken, and you're going to take less damage overall, right? The build is based on physical damage reduction. It's a leather-wearing tank, high HP, physical damage reduction, high mobility, good crowd control, significant active mitigation, and DPS. AoE build. And from a beta tester's perspective, I mean, this is the best current build for Demon Hunter tank. It doesn't do as much single target. You can expect 150k in a boss fight if it's a single boss. But you can do an outrageous amount of DPS during trash mod pulls, which is like 60% of the... I mean, this is a fortified week. You want to excel on ad pulls. And the active healing is significant. You also notice that I take Soulmonger, right, instead of Focused Cleave and stacking Frailty, which are spiky damage mitigation, right? Because you're not going to have 10 stacks of Frailty all the time. When you're doing an ad pull, you're going to be hitting Spirit Bomb if you selected the talent. And if you didn't, you're only going to be hitting 5 mobs. So are you only pulling 5 mobs at a time? Because you're only hitting 5. What are you doing with the other 10? Hoping that Sigil of Flame and Immolation Ore holds aggro? And if you're not using Sigil of Chains, I mean, the biggest difference between a Demon Hunter tank and a Guardian Druid is Sigil of Chains, Sigil of Silence, AoE Silence, and Sigil of Chains. If you're a Guardian Druid, you've got Vortex and Typhoon. 2 globals to do the same thing that Sigil of Chains can do instantly. They don't have an equivalent to Sigil of Silence. They have Incapacitating Roar, which is the same as Sigil of Misery. And they have Kick, right? Skull Bash. So your crowd control is the key differentiator between Demon Hunter tank and Guardian Druid. Otherwise, they're both very similar. High physical damage reduction, 85% cap, significant AoE DPS, acceptable single target DPS. So if you're building Demon Hunter and you don't take your crowd control, play Guardian Druid. From a beta tester's perspective, let's look real quick, class and spec. The top third of your class Talents I didn't choose. Those are situational based on the affects on any given week, and this week I don't need them. Fortified, Volcanic, and Spiteful. Across the middle, if you look at Pursuit, Fellfire Haste, you're already very mobile, and you can enchant your boots for an additional 10% speed. So taking additional talents to increase your speed is probably not beneficial. So I don't take those, right? You already have increased Fury generation. You're at 120 Fury, and this build you'll be hard pressed. You'll be doing Fury dumps just to get off 120%. So having talents that give you additional Fury is probably also not beneficial, right? So Disrupting Fury, Swallowed Anger, where you get additional Fury if you kick or consume magic. Not worth taking. Precise Sigils, you can script that. Cast add player. Cast add target. I don't know why this talent's even here, because that's scriptable. Some of my sigils I do a mouse over, some of them I cast add player myself, depending on my playstyle. I don't need that. An improved Spectral Sight. I mean, there's limited use for Spectral Sight in this expansion in the first place. Assassins in Halls of Infusion, for example. And having the talent into that so I can get to precise sigils, which is something I can macro, is, in my opinion, not worth taking. When you get to, there are two, however, in the center. There's an improvement to Chaos Nova where every add hit by your stunned by your Chaos Nova, you have a 30% chance to generate a Lesser Soul Fragment. That's nice. Increase the critical strike of Immolation Aura by 6%. That's also nice. However, you get to a point where you have to weigh the value of one talent over another, and you can see which ones I took and which ones I didn't. The bottom third, this is, probably more contentious. Most people are going to take Darkness, the Hunt, Demon Muzzle. I guess the way I look at it, how often do you use Darkness in a dungeon? 3 times? It's got a 5-minute cooldown. You use it 3 times as a tank. You have 15% to dodge. You can throw a second talent and reduce the cooldown by 120 seconds. Use it 3 times. You can avoid all damage 3 times. A 15% chance. Just so you can get to the Hunt, which does less than 5 million overall DPS, 5 million DPS in the overall dungeon. You have to line up all of your ads. It's not like you can just press a button. Oh, the Hunt. It's a cast time spell. You have to run through ads to get to your target. It slows them. It doesn't do a lot of DPS, so it's. I found better value selecting talents like Collective Anguish, where every time I hit Fell Devastation, I get an eye beam for 2 seconds that does 10 million overall DPS in the dungeon. And the Demon Muzzle, 8% reduced magical damage taken. Again, 2/3 of all the damage you take in a dungeon are physical damage. You also have 2 talents that reduce magic damage taken by 15%. Illidari Knowledge, and where's the other one over here? Every time you hit Immolation Aura, it reduces your magical damage taken by 10%. Fell Flame Fortification. How much damage reduction do you need to be a tank when you can do 250k healing? Single target. And the majority of your damage is physical damage. And again, it's just you only get to select 30 talents. You don't get all of them, so carefully choose the talents that you want to use based on your playstyle and the value of one talent over another. Some of the talents on the spec side, I leaned into the fire damage, right? Fiery Brand, Immolation Aura, Sigil of Flame. I mean, some of these are, even on the class side, Flames of Fury increases fire damage done by Sigil of Flames by 70%. Generates 2 Fury every time it does damage. That's significant, right? Fiery Brand reduces all damage you take by 40% while doing instant and damage over time. And then if you go down to Fire Demise, increase all fire damage you do by 50% whenever Fiery Brand is active. Then you go down to the bottom row, Down in Flames, reduce the cooldown of Fiery Brand by 25% and gives you an additional charge, which gives you an uptime of 50 or 60%. And if you're taking illuminated sigils, for the folks that say the foundation of the Demon Hunter tank build is illuminated sigils, regardless of whether you're playing Soulglaive versus Spirit Bomb, what's your uptime on Sigil of Flames? Because that's where your damage is coming from. That's where your additional parry chance is coming from while you are standing in your Sigil of Flames with your bad guys. Your parry chance increased by 15%. What happens if you drop Sigil of Flames when you're pulling ads because you didn't talent into the additional Throglaive? Talents Throglaive, by the way, for all you rookie tanks, is high threat generating, just like Torment. So you can throw glaive at a group, they'll run to you. Unless you take Master of the Glaive. Because it snares the ads, right? The last thing you want to do as a tank is have ads 20 yards away. So if you're using illuminated sigils and your opening sequence requires you to drop Sigil of Flames 10 yards over so you can pull those ads to you to generate your initial aggro instead of just throwing glaive and letting them run to you. I mean, are you getting the 15% increased parry chance? And what is your uptime on Fiery Brand? And did you even use Burning Alive? Burning Alive spreads Fiery Brand to one additional target every 1 second. If you have 2 charges, they don't overlap. It extends the duration so you can have a maximum duration of 24 seconds uptime on Fiery Brand. And there's a talent, Feed the Demon. Reduce the remaining cooldown. Demon Spikes, that's not the one I want. There's a talent you can take that increases, here it is. Charred Flesh increases the duration of Fiery Brand and Sigil of Flames by half a second every time you have Immolation Aura active. So whenever you have Immolation Aura active and you have Fiery Brand and Sigil of Flames down, it extends their duration. Immolation Aura has 11-second cooldown impacted by haste. It lasts for 9 seconds. Sigil of Flame has a 30-second cooldown. It lasts for 10 seconds. So you can extend the duration of Sigil of Flames. Immolation Aura in one application applies damage 10 times. So you will effectively extend the duration of Sigil of Flames by 5 seconds. Right? So instead of 10 seconds, it goes to 15 seconds. And during that time, you can also reapply Immolation Aura because it only has an 11-second cooldown, extending the duration further. So even without illuminated sigils, you can have a significant uptime on Sigil of Flames. And we already talked about the duration of Fiery Brand and having Immolation Aura up while Fiery Brand is active extends the duration beyond 24 seconds. In fact, it'll extend it to 29 seconds. One application, but since it's got an 11-second cooldown, you can apply it multiple times while you've only had to apply Fiery Brand a couple. And you can get significant uptime on Sigil of Flames, and Fiery Brand just because of your haste, right? That's why I pointed out haste and immolation at the beginning. And as an example, I mean, we put all of our videos raw feed. You can see the results. You can also see the details results, right? This is an average dungeon, +8 in Altheris. I don't use illuminated sigils. I had 51% uptime on Sigil of Flames, 50% uptime on Fiery Brand. You're not going to get that with the illuminated sigils build. You might get lucky to get 35%. What is your uptime on Sigil of Flames? If you have enough haste and you're doing it right, you can get to like 65%. And then Demon Spikes. I'm getting 90% uptime on Demon Spikes, which is physical damage reduction of greater than 50% for 90% of the dungeon, and 15% increased parry chance for 90% of the dungeon, which is way better than you're going to get for illuminated sigils. So, I mean, there's a lot to take in right there. Always drop Sigil of Flames and Fiery Brand prior to Immolation Ore, so you can extend the duration of those two and get higher uptime. And then Demon Spikes is off the global cooldown, along with being impacted by haste. It's off the global cooldown, just like Metamorphosis and Infernal Strike, and Torment, by the way. So you can macro Demon Spikes to Immolation Ore, for example, or Fracture. And you don't even have to press the button. It doesn't even have to be on your action bar. And you're going to get 90%, 85, 90% uptime. But Taunt also doesn't need to be on your action bar, because if you talent it into Throwglade, which is high threat, you can macro Taunt to Throwglade. And if you look at my metrics, look at my uptime on Taunt. It's over 5 minutes, 25% uptime. I hit it 19 times. I didn't hit it once, I just threw Glaive a lot, right? And it's macro to throw Glaive, so every time I threw Glaive, I was also taunting a guy. Just easy mode, fewer buttons, less for me to worry about. I can obviously click Taunt. It's on my action bar, but I usually don't. And if you look at the overall damage numbers, I mean, your damage is almost entirely fire damage, your big hitters, and it's almost entirely AoE. So when I said it's this is more of a pure AoE tank, that's what I meant. These aren't single target, and that's what, almost 50% of my overall damage. And then if you talk about healing, another talent I took, let me get to the healing page. Soulmonger, 35 million healing, 33% of my overall healing for this dungeon. There's a guide on the internet, which I won't tell you the name of, who said that the Soulmonger is a completely worthless talent, never take it. And talenting into the Demon Spikes build was a waste of time, because you can only use it in preparation for active damage mitigation. I'll tell you that's obviously not someone who beta tested before. This is a +8. We did a video at the end of season 3, and I was doing on the same build. I was doing like +21, +22s, and I was getting the same results. And just for a comparison, we didn't return to the game until week 8 of season 3, and I was top 10 in the world on tanking of all tanks, top 10%, 11 somewhere in there. And this season, I'm leveling 4 tunes at the same time. So, I'll get there, 3 or 4K by the end of the season 4. I'm a healer in my tank. I can tell you that Soulmonger was an Azurite trade for a reason. It's outstanding, and if you're not taking it, you should. What is it? What is Soulmonger? All the overhealing from Consumed Soul is added as a shield. in the form of Soulmonger, and you can see that the max hit for this one was 421k. And you can also see, based on the metrics, that Soulmonger had 50% uptime for this dungeon, which meant that I was at 100% health for 50% of the dungeon, and I had a shield that at times was 500,000 thick, which makes it significantly easier for my healer to do their job. And if you look at healing taken through the dungeon, my healer was healing me for 21k. Overall healing I took from all sources was 27k. So 114k damage taken, 27k unmitigated healing someone else had to do for me. You have to ask yourself, if you're playing the Soul Cleave build, how are you doing? I've seen Demon Hunter tanks, I've seen tanks, +8s, +9s. I've healed for those tanks and had to heal them for 60k, 50k, 60k, all the time. This one, +8, a pug group, my first dungeon of the day, actually, less than 30k. And I was only taking 114k damage. That's how you play Demon Hunter tank. It's a leather-wearing tank, high HP, high physical damage reduction, pure AoE, 500-600k on ad pulse, 150k during the boss, significant self-healing, upwards of 200k, no problem, decent cooldowns, nice trinkets that are available, 40% reduction of all damage taken for 50% of the dungeon. And 50% of the dungeon, I was at 100% health. And those were not a one-to-one match, right? That's smooth damage taken. That's easy for a healer. He can focus on the healing the DPS or DPSing himself, right? I mean, this guy was doing almost 70k DPS. He's a holy paladin. So, unscripted, deep dive into Vengeance Demon Hunter from a beta tester's perspective. Don't get me wrong, I know there's folks that are going to say I'm totally off base, but we wrote a guide, Demon Hunter Vengeance Tank Guide, and advocated on behalf of the Soul Cleave build. But in this instance, in this season, in this expansion, Spirit Bomb's the way to go. You'll do less single target DPS, you'll do more AoE. Your group will take less damage, your healer will do more DPS. And the difference in overall DPS isn't really, I mean, how much DPS are you doing single target? This guy can easily do 150k single target DPS during a boss fight with no flask and no hero. And he can, I've got video on the internet right now where he's doing almost 700k DPS during an ad pull. I should say, because it's Tamantia. So if you're looking for the technical deep dive on Demon Hunter, just to recap, leather wearing, high HP, high physical damage reduction, active and passive mitigation in the form of dodge, parry, physical damage reduction, significant self-healing, significant DPS, significant crowd control, high mobility. Very fun tank to play. And if you're going to do it well, there is a pretty decent skill cap, right? You're not just going to roll your face on the keyboard with this tank and do it well. But if you're at 515 or better item level, you should easily be able to get the numbers that you see on the screen. All right. Thanks again for watching. Like and subscribe. Have a nice night. Bye.